Hello, and welcome to Which Way to the Wild West, as read by Senor Duque. Today's reading begins on page 50. Please make sure that you've turned your book to page 50. Follow along as I read the text. I'll pause, and a question will appear on the screen. Now back to Polk. President James K. Polk wasn't thinking of going to California. He was thinking about how to make it part of the United States. Remember, Polk had run for president on the promise of expanding American territory. Last we heard, Polk was threatening to fight Great Britain over Oregon and Mexico over the rest of the West. The Oregon conflict turned out to be pretty easy to resolve. After lots of tough talk, Britain and the United States agreed to simply split the territory. In June 1846, the United States officially took over the huge chunk of land that is now the northwest region of the country. The conflict with Mexico was much more dangerous. Furious Mexican leaders had two major complaints. One, the United States had no right to annex Texas, they argued. Two, even if the United States did annex Texas, Americans were grabbing too much land. The Mexicans insisted that the Nueces River formed the southern border of Texas. Everything south of the river was not part of Texas, so it was still Mexican territory. Annexation or no annexation? Let's pause and answer question number 1. All right, let's continue. Polk saw it differently. He argued that the border of Texas was actually 150 miles farther south at the Rio Grande, so all that extra land came with Texas. With this border dispute raging, Polk offered to buy New Mexico and California from Mexico. It probably wasn't the right time to ask. In no mood to lose even more land to the Americans, offended Mexican leaders angrily rejected Polk's offer. Then, Polk cranked the tension up another notch. In March 1846, he sent American soldiers to Texas. Under Polk's orders, the troops crossed the Nueces River and continued south into the land claimed by both the United States and Mexico. The soldiers were there to defend American territory, Polk explained. Let's pause and answer question 2. All right, let's continue. But to Mexican officials, this was an invasion of the Mexican state of Tamaulipas. General Pedro de Ampudia warned the Americans, "If you insist on remaining upon the soil of the Department of Tamaulipas, it will certainly result that arms, and arms alone, must decide the question." Let's pause and answer question 3. All right, let's continue. General Zachary Taylor, commander of the American troops, assured the Mexicans that he did insist on remaining. By April, the two armies were glaring at each other across the 100-yard-wide Rio Grande. Both sides expected an explosion of violence at any moment. War, land, gold, trouble. On April 25, 1846, Mexican soldiers splashed across the Rio Grande and attacked a small group of American troops. 16 Americans were killed and the rest captured. "Hostilities have commenced," General Taylor wrote to President Polk. When the letter reached Washington, it took a couple of weeks. Polk immediately went to Congress to demand a declaration of war. "Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States," he said, "has invaded our territory and shed American blood upon the American soil." Cause for war? Had the shooting really started in American territory? Some members of Congress didn't think so. "That soil was not ours," said a little-known House member from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln. To Lincoln, it looked like Polk had purposely sent American soldiers into the disputed territory in order to spark a war with Mexico. Let's pause and answer question 4. All right, let's continue. The war would give the United States an excuse to capture the land Mexico had refused to sell. Pretty rotten, thought Senator Alexander Stephens of Georgia. The principle of waging war against a neighboring people to compel them to sell their country is not only dishonorable, but disgraceful. Polk objected, pointing out that Mexico had started the shooting. He had always wanted peace with Mexico, he insisted. His opponents joked that what Polk really wanted was not peace with Mexico, but a peace of Mexico. Either way, the public was on Polk's side. American soldiers had been attacked, and there was strong support for war. Congress voted to declare war on Mexico in May 1846. Thousands of Americans rushed to volunteer for military service. As for Abraham Lincoln, he soon heard from angry voters back home who said his opposition to the war was pretty much an act of treason. One Illinois newspaper actually called him a second Benedict Arnold. That was the end of Lincoln's political career, experts said. Santa Anna does it again. For the next couple of pages, page 55, page 56, and a little bit of page 58, you're going to listen to what I read out loud, and you're going to use the information to fill out the chart on the exit slip. Let's think about the following question as we read. What steps did Americans take to make Texas part of the United States? And how did the United States get the land from Mexico in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? Follow along with me as we get the information to answer these two questions. Mexico should fight to the end, declared a newspaper in the Mexican city of Nuevo León. As long as there is one man remaining, he should go and fight the unjust invaders. The problem with this plan? The Mexican army was in awful shape. Most Mexican soldiers had very little training and terrible equipment, including old-fashioned muskets sold to them by the British, left over from wars Britain had fought 30 years ago. The army could not have survived without soldaderas, women who traveled along with the troops and did work the army should have done, cooking, making uniforms, caring for the sick and wounded. Another serious problem was that the Mexican army was led by General Antonio López de Santa Anna, the self-proclaimed genius who had lost Texas. Santa Anna was good at talking, though, not so good at actual fighting. When his army faced Americans at the Battle of Buena Vista in early 1847, Santa Anna demanded that the Americans surrender in order to save themselves. Tell Santa Anna to go beep, barked Zachary Taylor. Then Taylor turned to a staff member and said, Major Bliss, put that in Spanish and send it back. Bliss put Taylor's main idea into slightly more polite language. I beg leave to say that I decline acceding to your request. Santa Anna attacked, lost 5 times more men than the Americans, and declared victory. Then he retreated. In a series of short, brutal battles in the spring and summer of 1847, the American army continued slashing its way towards Mexico City. Meanwhile, the war with Mexico gave Polk an excuse to do something he wanted to do anyway: send American troops to capture California. Is that supposed to be a bear? Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo woke suddenly on the morning of June 14, 1846, startled by the sounds of shouts and horses. I looked out of my bedroom window, Vallejo said. To my great surprise, I made out groups of armed men scattered to the right and left of my residence. As Mexico's military commander in Northern California, and uncle to the young pioneer on page 44, Vallejo had always been welcoming to American immigrants. He often invited newcomers to stay at his large ranch in Sonoma and help them settle in California. But that did him no good when armed Americans banged on his door. My wife advised me to try and flee by the rear door, Vallejo remembered, but I told her that such a step was unworthy and that under no circumstances could I decide to desert my young family at such a critical time. He jumped into his general's uniform and opened his door. The house was immediately filled with armed men, he said. These weren't Polk's soldiers, just regular guys with guns wearing greasy clothes and very dirty hats. They were about as rough-looking a set of men as one could well imagine, admitted Robert Semple, one of the Americans. We're jumping to page 58. Redraw the map again. In September 1847, American soldiers captured Mexico City. Having lost the war, Mexican leaders were forced to accept the same basic deal they had angrily rejected 2 years before. In the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico gave up nearly half its territory, including the disputed land in Texas, all of California, New Mexico, and the rest of what is now the southwestern United States. The United States paid Mexico $15 million. Now the West is west, the U.S. in 1848. You can see in the map the land that we got from this treaty. Now all the land we think of as the West today was part of the United States. Look on your paper at the exit slip. Based on the reading we just did, you're going to answer the 2 questions. What steps did Americans take to make Texas part of the United States? There are 4 dates to look for here. 1822, from 1822 to 1830. In 1845, James K. Polk, and then from 1846 to 1848. And then we have the other question, how did the United States get the land from Mexico in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? What land did the U.S. get from Mexico? And what did we give Mexico in exchange for that land? Make sure you fill this out completely so that you have your exit ticket ready to hand in. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.